And next up we have Isr Kale's Journal, The Alchemist, book number 4, written by Vasily Mahenko. This is 323 pages, $6.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. These were dark times for Tailyn Vlashich. The 12-year-old alchemist, he's been banished from the Empire. The Academy has summarily dismissed him. The deadly killer had been dispatched to hunt him. He'd been dropped all the way down to level 1, but while there weren't many adults who would have been able to cope with the litany of problems Tailyn was facing, they weren't him. And he had help, 2 mentors, his girl, and a friend. Not only that, but there was an ancient journal hidden somewhere in the Academy's Dean office that he held the secret to locations of the dragon's blood. It was time to drop by and get their hands on it. All they had to do was clear one small hurdle. How are they going to get into the planet's most heavily guarded building? So there we go. Full disclosure, I received a copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is an interesting story. Books 1 through 3 in this series kind of have a nice arc that does kind of like tie off a number of storylines. I think another major storyline is tied off in this particular 4th book in the series, but there's also like a mid and front section that kind of felt a little out of left field in some respects. And I don't want to spoil what it is, but the storyline of the game mechanics definitely take a shift towards town building and kingdom building, and it's well done and everything. There's plenty of numbers and information as far as development goes, and plans and structures, and even some town defense stuff where a wave of monsters come in and the main character and his group have to defend against them. But for a good portion of the story, I was like, why does this exist here? This wasn't one of those things where it was kind of foreshadowed, or it's oh, this is something there's always going to plan, and the author may have planned it himself, but I didn't get that sense from the first 2 books in the series, and I was kind of curious what what the point was, because after a lot of that section is revealed, then it goes back to the storyline that the novel description talks about, which is oh, we go back to the academy, we got to get this thing to fulfill this quest line that's been talked about since the beginning of the series, and that felt very much in line with this is part of that plot line. This is a quest line that's being tied off and finished up as it should be. It's been a little bit, but it's not to the very end of the story. We're oh, okay, that town building stuff makes more sense now. It's set up for book 5, where it's going to come through a lot more importantly. So the author's really just doing setup for it. But regardless of what that was, it was still an enjoyable story. It was just that for a good portion of it, some of it didn't make sense as far as what the author was going to do with it. The mechanics were set up well. It had plenty of action and adventure and all that good stuff that's been part of the series. But because I felt a little lost as far as its purpose for a good portion of the story, it wasn't quite as enjoyable. And that's why as a reader, I felt just a little bit confused as to what the point was. And so whenever I have the feeling, I'm just not enjoying it as much as I guess I had hoped. It's still an interesting story. I had a good time with it. It's just not my favorite in the series. But by the end of the story, I was oh, okay, now I get that. But I'm kind of reviewing it as an overall product, and not just the end had a nice actiony twist like it normally is in the series that explains everything. I still have to take into consideration my earlier confusion about where the plot line was going, what it's going to do with this town building stuff. And now I understand it. But again, taking into consideration on the whole, it's going to get a slightly lower score for me, but still good in the good section. It's still a 7. Going to be a 7.3 out of 10. Still an entertaining read. Again, just not my favorite in the series, so it's going to just a few decimal points off. So instead of being 7.5, which is right in the middle, good, just a couple points off because of just me not enjoying it quite as much because I was confused for a little bit. But overall, again, still a very enjoyable read for anybody who's a fan of the series. I think they'll enjoy it still. So 7.3 out of 10 for Isr Kale's Journal, The Alchemist, book number 4.